April 1946. The village of Krushina, Voronezh region. Ivan Suhorukov had returned from the dead. His mother had held his memorial service 3.5 years ago, had placed his photograph at the iconostasis with a vigil lamp, and wore a black headscarf. His fiancée, Ekaterina Zotova, had waited for him for 2 years, had cried over the death notice, and then had married another, given birth to a child, and built a new life. And Ivan stood at the gate of her house, exhausted, gray-haired at 26, in a patched military tunic taken from another's shoulder. He watched as Nikolai Semyonov, a fellow villager, a one-handed war veteran, Ekaterina's new husband, came out of the izba. In 5 years, the war had taken everything from Ivan, his youth, his love, his future. And something even worse awaited him. A new arrest, 10 years in the camps, and the return to a deserted village, where no one was left. But let's take it all one step at a time. June 22, 1941, Sunday. The village of Krushina awoke to the crowing of roosters and the tolling of bells from the neighboring village's church. The day promised to be hot. The sun rose over the fields, evaporating the dew from the grass. Ivan Suhorukov woke up early, out of his tractor driver's habit. At 21, he was a strapping lad, broad-shouldered, with the tanned hands of a mechanic. An open face, bright eyes. In them, one could read that youthful confidence, which had not yet known true trials. His mother, Maria Petrovna, was already bustling by the stove. She was 48 years old but looked older. The hard life of a collective farmer burned women out quickly. A wrinkled face, calloused hands, a back bent from constant work in the garden and on the farm. Ivan's father, Petru Stepanovici, had been taken in the year 37. The NKVD Troika had given him 10 years for failing to meet the grain delivery plan and for alleged sabotage. Letters came from him for 2 years. Then, they stopped. Maria Petrovna did not know if her husband was alive, but hope was almost gone. Now only she and Ivan remained in the house, alone, the two of them, in a 5-walled izba at the edge of the village. Ivan washed with cold water from the washstand on the porch, dried himself with a homespun towel. His mother silently placed a pot of hot porridge on the table, cut black bread, brought a pitcher of milk. They ate in silence. Such was the custom in peasant families, without superfluous words. After breakfast, Ivan got ready to go to Ekaterina. They had been seeing each other for 2 years, planning to have their wedding that summer. They had already arranged with the kolkhoz chairman for a house to be allocated to the young couple. They were preparing the dowry. His mother approved of her son's choice. Ekaterina was hard-working, beautiful, from a good family. Her father, Zotov Mikhail Ivanovich, worked as a brigadier. Her mother toiled as a milkmaid. The family was considered sturdy, reliable. Ivan went out into the street. Ekaterina Zotova lived 5 houses away from the Suhorukovs. She was 19 years old. A beautiful girl, a blonde braid down to her waist, gray eyes, a clear face without pockmarks or scars, which was a rarity in the village. She worked as a milkmaid on the farm, got up at 4 in the morning, managed 15 cows. Strong hands, but not rough. She wore a linen dress, which she herself had remade from her mother's. Ivan loved her with that first pure love that happens only once in a lifetime. She reciprocated his feelings, waited for him from work, saw him off to the edge of the village, wrote him letters when he left for tractor driver courses in the district center. Ivan knocked on the gate. Ekaterina came out onto the porch barefoot, in a light dress, her hair braided. She saw him, smiled. That smile would be etched in Ivan's mind for the rest of his life. They walked through the village, reached the outskirts, sat on a fallen birch tree by the road, talked about the wedding, about the future, about the house they would be given. They dreamed of children, of how they would live, work, grow their household. The war seemed something distant. The newspapers wrote about events in Europe, but in the village, this was perceived as something unreal, which did not concern their lives. The morning of June 23rd began as usual. Ivan woke up to a neighbor's scream outside the window, ran outside. People were gathering at the kolkhoz headquarters, where the only radio point in the village was located. From the black plate of the loudspeaker, the announcer's voice could be heard. Measured, official, but anxiety could be felt in it. The words were frightening. War, Germany, The bombing of cities. Invasion. Molotov was giving a speech to the people. Maria Petrovna stood by the fence, crossing herself. Her face had turned white. Other women were crying, wailing. The men were silent, looking grimly at each other. Everyone understood. The draft is starting. They will take everyone who can hold a rifle. The kolkhoz chairman, Kuznetsov, came out onto the headquarters porch, announced that by evening the order would come from the district regarding mobilization. They must prepare. Ivan returned home. His mother silently took his father's military tunic out of the chest, washed and folded since the last war. Petru Stepanovich had fought in the First World War, returned shell-shocked but alive. Now this tunic was to serve his son. Maria Petrovna stroked the fabric with trembling hands, without looking up. There were no tears, just a heavy silence and the feeling of impending doom. By noon, the rumor had spread through the village. They were drafting all men from 18 to 45 years old. Assembly at the District Military Commissariat in 2 days, on June 25th. They must report with documents, warm clothes, and dry rations for 3 days. Ivan fell under the draft, like most of the villagers his age. Fyodor Grishin, Nikolai Semyonov, the Kovalyov brothers, Petru Lamakin. In total, 28 men were to leave Kryushina. Only a few would return. Ekaterina came running towards evening, her eyes red, her headscarf askew. She hugged Ivan, started crying on his shoulder. He stroked her head, told her everything would be fine, that the war would end quickly, that he would return and they would have their wedding. Whether he himself believed these words, it is not known. It just had to be so. It was proper. The man had to reassure, to give hope, even if inside everything was freezing with fear. They sat on the porch until dark. Ekaterina laid her head on his shoulder. Ivan looked at the stars, the quiet village street, the izbas steeped in lilac. All of this was so dear, so enduring, and at the same time, so fragile. He did not know that in a year this village would fall under occupation, that the Germans would stay here for 8 months, that many houses would be burned, that half the inhabitants would die of hunger and disease. He just held Ekaterina's hand and was silent. June 25th, the day of departure. Maria Petrovna got up at 4 in the morning, lit the stove-baked flatbreads for the road, boiled eggs, wrapped bacon and bread in a cloth, prepared a bundle for her son. A change of shirt, foot wraps, a piece of homemade soap thread with a needle, a wooden spoon. Everything according to the list from the summons. Ivan put on a clean shirt, his father's tunic, the boots he had been saving for the wedding. His mother silently made the sign of the cross over him, held him to her chest, did not cry. The tears had run out yesterday. Now only a dull numbness remained. The whole village gathered to see them off. Carts stood at the kolkhoz headquarters. The chairman had allocated 3 carts to take the recruits to the district center, 20 versts away. The men climbed in silently. Women wailed, children cried. Ekaterina held Ivan's hand, wouldn't let go. He hugged her, kissed her on the forehead, told her, "Wait for me, I'll come back, we'll get married." She nodded, unable to speak. The carts started moving. Ivan looked back. Ekaterina stood by the road, waving a handkerchief. His mother was nearby, bent, small. The village receded, dissolved into the morning mist. Ivan watched until everything disappeared around the bend. He would not see this village again for 5 years, and everything would be different. The first letter from Ivan came in mid-July 1941. A soldier's letter triangle, written with an indelible pencil on thin paper. The handwriting large, uneven. He had probably written on his knee or a tree stump. The text short, passed through military censorship. Whole lines blacked out. Only general phrases remained. "Mom, I'm alive, healthy, doing my military service. The unit is on the front line near Smolensk. They feed us normally. The commander is good. Send my greetings to Ekaterina. Tell her I love her and await our reunion. I kiss you. Ivan." Maria Petrovna read the letter with trembling hands, then reread it again, examining every word. She took it to Ekaterina. She clutched the paper to her chest, cried with relief. "He's alive. It means he's writing. It means he'll return." The second letter came in August, even shorter. In September, the third letter came. The handwriting nervous, The letters jumped. Mom, I'm alive. Wounded in the hand, lightly. It's already healing. The Germans are advancing. We are holding on. Few comrades left. Reinforcements can't get through. The commander was killed. The new one is a very young lieutenant. Ekaterina, I will return, I swear. I kiss you. Ivan. The word wounded cut Maria Petrovna to the heart. She went to the village council, asked if she could find out something more detailed. What unit he was in, where exactly he was fighting. The village council chairman, old Makarov, waved his hands. Impossible, military secret. They only write what they're allowed. If it were something serious, a death notice would have come. If he's writing, it means he's alive. Ekaterina carried the last letter in her bosom, reread it in the evenings by lamplight. During the day, she worked on the farm. Since the beginning of the war, all the men's work had fallen on the women's shoulders. Milking, cleaning the stables, carrying feed, mowing hay. The quota had been raised twice, the workdays, trudodni, reduced. The kolkhoz chairman demanded the plan be met. The front needed products, meat, milk. The women worked to exhaustion, collapsed from fatigue, but they weren't allowed to complain. It was war. Everyone had to endure. In October, the fourth letter came, very short, on a scrap of paper. Alive, near Vyazma, encirclement, trying to break through. Don't worry, Ivan. Nothing more. Maria Petrovna ran to her neighbor, whose husband was also fighting near Vyazma. She had already received a death notice 2 weeks ago. Vyazma meant catastrophe. This was whispered in the village, although the newspapers wrote about the heroic defense of Moscow. November, December, January. There were no letters. Maria Petrovna went to the post office every day, asked the postwoman, Antonina Semyonovna, "Is there anything?" She would shake her head. Ekaterina had grown thin, withered. Her eyes had sunk into their sockets. At night she cried into her pillow. Her mother, Zotova Anna Ivanovna, urged her not to think dark thoughts. Maybe the letters were delayed. Maybe the unit was redeployed. Anything can happen at the front. In February 1942, a letter came not from Ivan, but from his comrade, Petru Lamakin, also from Kryushina. He wrote that he had seen Ivan in a hospital near Moscow in December. He was laid up with frostbitten feet, but was supposed to be discharged in a week and return to his unit. Petru himself had ended up in another subdivision. He hadn't seen Ivan again, but he knew he had been sent near Kharkov. They were forming a new army there. Maria Petrovna rejoiced. Alive, it means he was treated, not killed. Ekaterina also calmed down. March passed without news, April likewise. At the beginning of May, Ivan's last letter came, dated April 20th. Mom, Ekaterina, I'm alive, healthy. The unit is near Kharkov. We are preparing for an offensive. The command promises a breakthrough. The mood is combative. I will write again soon. I kiss you tightly. Your Ivan. Maria Petrovna kept this letter until the end of her life. Ekaterina also kept her copy. Ivan had written 2 identical triangles. One to his mother, one to his fiancée. Both women reread the lines, studied the handwriting, tried to catch the mood. Did it sound confident? Was there no trace of anxiety? It seemed everything was normal. Ivan wrote calmly, even with hope. Then silence fell. May passed, June passed, July. There were no letters. Maria Petrovna was tormented, went to the post office every day. Ekaterina also waited, clung to hope. The newspapers wrote about heavy fighting near Kharkov, about the German offensive, about our retreat towards Voronezh and Stalingrad. But there was no exact information, only general phrases about the heroism of Soviet soldiers. In August, death notices began to arrive in the village. The first was received by Grishin's widow. Husband killed near Zhev. Then they brought a death notice to the Kovalyov family. Both brothers had died on the same day. Then to Makarov, Lopatin, Kuznetsov. Of the 28 men who left Kryushina in the summer of 41, by the autumn of 42, 14 men had died, half. The village was in mourning, black headscarves on the women, wailing, memorial services. Maria Petrovna and Ekaterina waited. Every day, when the postwoman Antonina Semyonovna appeared on the street, the women froze. To whom would she bring a triangle or a black notice today? Antonina walked slowly, her heavy bag slung over her shoulder, stopped at the next gate, entered the yard. If she came out quickly, it meant a regular letter or a receipt. If she lingered, it meant a death notice. She had to support, to help. August 30th, 1942. Saturday. A hot, dusty day. Maria Petrovna was weeding in the garden. Ekaterina was helping her, having taken a day off from the farm. They worked in silence, each lost in her own thoughts. Suddenly, the gate creaked. They turned around. In the doorway stood Antonina Semyonovna. Her face was gray, her eyes downcast. In her hands an official envelope, with the stamp of the military commissariat. Maria Petrovna straightened up, wiped her hands on her apron, went towards the gate. Her legs wouldn't obey her. She walked as if in a dream. Ekaterina froze with the hoe in her hands, turned pale. Antonina handed her the envelope, said quietly, "Take this, Maria Petrovna, from the military commissariat." Maria Petrovna took the envelope with trembling hands, opened it. Inside, a standard death notice form. The letters danced before her eyes, but the words were clearly legible. Private Suhorukov, Ivan Petrovici, born 1920, listed as missing in action in the battle near the city of Kharkov in May 1942. Unit number such and such. Unit commander, captain such and such. Missing in action. That meant only one thing. Either killed, but the body not found, or taken prisoner. In any case, the end. Those missing in action were almost never found. Maria Petrovna stood with the paper in her hands, motionless, then slowly sank onto the porch, put her head on her knees, didn't cry, just sat, holding her head in her hands. Ekaterina ran up, snatched the notice from her, read it, screamed, fell to her knees. Antonina embraced her, stroked her head, crying too. The neighbors heard the scream, came running, surrounded Ekaterina and Maria Petrovna, wailed, consoled them. But what consolation could there be? Son lost, fiancé gone, life was over. May 1942. Ivan Suhorukov, a soldier in an infantry regiment, was part of the troops of the Southwestern Front, near Kharkov. He was 21 years old, but looked 30. His face was weather-beaten, gaunt, his eyes sunken. In 10 months of war, he had been through the battles near Smolensk, the retreat to Moscow, the defense of the capital in winter, the wound in his hand, the frostbite on his feet, the hospital, the return to the front. He had seen death, blood, the horror of war. He had learned not to think about tomorrow, to live from one battle to the next. Ivan's unit had been hastily assembled after the winter offensive near Moscow. The regiment commander, Captain Ryzhkov, 35 years old, a career officer, had fought against Finland. The company commander, Lieutenant Kovalyov, 23 years old, a graduate of accelerated courses, at the front for 3 months. There were about 150 men in the company. Most were young recruits after brief training. 1 or 2 months of instruction. Old Mosin rifles, 2 clips of cartridges per man. Uniforms poorly fitted, not everyone had boots, but morale was high. They believed in a quick victory, in the spring offensive crushing the Germans. On May 12th, the command gave the order to attack Kharkov. The plan was ambitious, to encircle the German grouping, liberate the city, and develop the success further west. On paper, it all looked convincing, but reality proved different. The Germans were expecting the offensive, had prepared, had brought in reserves. On May 17th, everything collapsed. The Germans launched a counterattack on the flanks, powerful, unexpected, sweeping away everything in its path: tanks, aviation, artillery. Soviet units began to retreat, to fall apart, to get tangled in orders. Communication was lost. Command lost control. Chaos began. On May 20th, Ivan's company was encircled in the area of the village of Misoedovo, 30 kilometers southeast of Kharkov. The Germans had closed the ring around several Soviet divisions. The commanders tried to organize a breakout, but the forces were unequal. Almost all the artillery was lost. There were no tanks, ammunition was running out. German aviation bombed unopposed. Soviet fighters were not seen in the sky. On May 22nd, the company received the order to break through to the east, towards their own, at night. Lieutenant Kovalyov gathered the men, explained the task. To go through the forest, force the Bereka River, reach the village of Krasnaya, where our units should be. To move quietly, not to shoot without need, to save cartridges. Ivan checked his rifle, tucked 2 grenades into his bosom, crossed himself. The column set off in the darkness. About 120 men, the remnants of the company. They were joined by fighters from other subdivisions, stragglers who had lost their commanders. They walked silently, single file, holding on to each other. The forest was dense, dark, frightening. Ivan walked in the middle of the column, next to a fellow villager from a neighboring village, Petru Gonchiarov. He was whispering a prayer, fingering his prayer beads. They walked for about 3 kilometers, came out to the edge of the forest. Ahead was a field, beyond it, the river. Lieutenant Kovalyov stopped the column, crawled forward to reconnoiter. He returned half an hour later. The river is close, no guards visible. They can go. The column moved on, but the Germans were waiting. As soon as the Soviet fighters emerged into the open space, fire opened up. Machine guns from 3 sides, mortars, submachine guns. Signal flares flew into the sky, turning night into day. People fell, screamed, ran chaotically. Lieutenant Kovalyov ordered them to hit the dirt, to return fire, but it was already too late. The Germans were shooting the rows methodically, without haste. Ivan fell into the grass, pressed himself to the ground. A mine exploded nearby, covered him with earth. He was deafened, his ears ringing. He tried to get up. He managed. He ran towards the river, following the remnants of the company. Bullets whistled. Someone fell nearby, groaned. Ivan grabbed him under the arm, dragged him, but he was already dead. A bullet in the head. He left him, ran further, reached the bank. The river was about 15 meters wide. The current swift, the water cold. He threw himself into the water, swam. The rifle pulled him down. The boots got wet, became heavy. The current carried him aside. Ivan thrashed his arms, his legs, choked, but swam. The icy water cramped his muscles. The bank seemed infinitely far. An explosion nearby. The Germans were throwing grenades into the river. A wave covered Ivan, dragged him under, spat him out in the shallows. He crawled out, lay in the reeds, gasping. The firing continued. Screams, groans, explosions. Then silence fell. The Germans were scouring the area, finishing off the wounded, gathering prisoners. Ivan lay motionless. The rifle was lost in the river. The grenades were soaked. The military ID book in his breast pocket had turned into a wet pulp. The documents were irretrievably destroyed. The letters had bled. The stamps were invisible. He tried to hide the remains in his boot, but realized it was useless. Nothing could be restored. Dawn, May 23rd. Ivan was crawling through the reeds along the river, trying to escape the Germans. His head was spinning, his ears pounding. Concussion. He didn't understand where his side was, where the enemy was. He just crawled forward, clutching the grass. He stumbled upon a group of German soldiers. They were smoking, talking among themselves, examining trophies. Ivan tried to turn back, to crawl away, but one of the Germans noticed the movement in the reeds, shouted, "A burst of machine gun fire in the air!" Ivan froze, raised his hands. The Germans approached, kicked him to his feet, searched him. No weapons, no documents. Soviet soldier, prisoner. They tied his hands with wire, marched him towards the road. A column of prisoners already stood there, about 300 men, maybe more, ragged, exhausted, wounded. The German convoy surrounded the column, shouting, prodding them with rifle butts. Ivan joined the line, saw Petru Gonchiarov. He was bootless, his hand bandaged, barely able to stand. They looked into each other's eyes, nodded to one another. The column was marched west. Where to? No one knew. To a camp, to Germany, to execution. No one explained. They walked, under escort, without water, without food. Whoever fell was shot on the spot, left in the ditch. Petru Gonchiarov walked beside Ivan, whispering, "Don't give up, brother. We'll survive. We'll return." Ivan nodded, but his strength was almost gone. The column of prisoners was brought to a camp near Poltava after a 3-day march on foot. During these 3 days, they were given neither water nor food. Many fell from exhaustion, were shot, or left to die in the ditches. Ivan held on. Youth, robust village health helped him. Petru Gonciarov also made it, although the wound on his hand had become infected. Fever had set in. The camp was a field of several hectares, fenced with barbed wire. Watchtowers at the corners, searchlights, sentries with dogs. Inside, earth, bare earth. No barracks, no roofs, nothing. Just a few dugouts, where the sick and wounded huddled. There were several thousand prisoners. The remnants of the units encircled near Kharkov. Ivan ended up in this hell at the end of May 1942. He was 21 years old. 2 years of captivity lay ahead of him. But he didn't know that yet. He thought that soon there would be a prisoner exchange, or our side would advance and liberate them, or at least something would change. But nothing changed. The slow death began. The first thing that struck him was hunger. They were fed once a day. A thin gruel of rotten vegetables, without salt, without fat, 1 mug per man. Bread, 100 grams if you were lucky. People wasted away before his eyes, turned into skeletons. After a week, Ivan no longer recognized his reflection in a puddle. His face had thinned, his eyes sunken, his teeth bared. The second, the cold. They slept on the bare ground, huddling together to keep warm. Their clothes rotted on them, their boots fell apart. Ivan tore the sleeves off his tunic, wrapped his feet instead of foot wraps. Petru Gonciarov died 2 weeks after arriving in the camp. Blood poisoning from the wounded hand. He died in delirium, calling for his mother, his wife, his children. Ivan held his hand until his last breath. Then the Germans removed the body, threw it into a common grave, beyond the wire. The third. Diseases, dysentery, typhus, pneumonia. People died by the hundreds. Every morning the Germans went around the camp, collected the corpses, evacuated them. There was no medical station, no medicine, no help. If you got sick, that was it. The end. Ivan survived, not understanding how. Maybe youth, maybe the village tempering, maybe just luck. He worked. The Germans selected prisoners for work, clearing rubble in the cities, repairing roads, digging trenches. Hard labor, but for it, you got an extra portion of gruel. Ivan volunteered, worked to exhaustion so as not to think, to forget, to get another mug of soup. The summer of 42 dragged on endlessly. Heat, stench, flies, diseases. The prisoners dwindled. Some died, others were taken to Germany for work. Ivan remained in the camp. Probably, the commission considered him unfit for Germany due to exhaustion. In the autumn of 42, agitators from the ROA, Russian Liberation Army, appeared in the camp. They proposed joining the ranks of the Vlasovites to fight against the Bolsheviks. They promised normal food, uniforms, pay. Many agreed out of desperation, hunger, fear. Ivan refused, not because he was a staunch communist. He had not been in the party. Politics did not interest him. He simply could not imagine how he would shoot at his own people. The agitators did not insist. There were enough prisoners, and plenty willing. The winter of 42 to 43 was terrible. Frosts, snow, wind. Barracks still hadn't been built. People lived in dugouts, burrowed into the ground, covered themselves with rags. Ivan had dug himself a burrow, covered it with sheet metal from a barrel, lined it with straw. He slept there alone, curled up. At night, he heard people dying nearby. They groaned, rattled, then fell silent. In the morning, the Germans took them out. The spring of 43 brought relief. It got warmer, grass appeared, you could chew leaves, roots, anything that grew. Ivan ate goosefoot, nettles, tree bark. Dysentery plagued him, but he pulled through. The summer of 43. Ivan worked clearing rubble in Poltava. The city was destroyed by bombing. He had to dismantle ruins, clear roads. The prisoners worked under escort. Ivan carried bricks, broke down walls, loaded rubble into carts. His back ached, his hands were full of calluses, but he endured. Work meant life. In the autumn of 43, rumors appeared. The Red Army was advancing, liberating Ukraine. Soon, it would reach Poltava. The prisoners perked up, began to talk about the approaching liberation. But the Germans were not asleep. In September, they began evacuating the camp. All the prisoners were loaded into freight cars, taken west to western Ukraine, further from the front line. Ivan ended up in a camp near Lvov. There was a real barrack, bunk beds, a roof. The conditions were slightly better. They received 2 mugs of gruel, more bread. But the regime was stricter. For an escape attempt, shooting. For failing to meet the quota, the cooler. For discussions about the war, a beating. The winter of 43 to 44 passed in this camp. Ivan worked in logging, felling trees, cutting, transporting. Hard, but bearable. He thought about home, about his mother, about Ekaterina. They were not allowed to write letters. There was no connection with the homeland. He didn't know that his mother and Ekaterina had received the death notice, that they considered him dead, that their lives had been shattered. The spring of 44. The rumors of liberation grew stronger. The Red Army had reached the pre-war borders, was advancing into Poland. The Germans were nervous. The guard was tightened. In March, the camp was evacuated again, this time to Poland, in the Krakow area. Ivan met the summer of 44 in the camp near Krakow. He worked on building fortifications, digging trenches, installing pillboxes, stretching barbed wire. The Germans were preparing for defense. They understood the end was near. The prisoners were worked to exhaustion, but they began to feed them better. Labor was needed. In the autumn of 44, Ivan fell ill with pneumonia, lay in the camp infirmary. A cold barrack, beds without mattresses, no medicine. Few survived. Ivan survived. The body fought, did not give up. After a month he was back on his feet, returned to work. The winter of 44 to 45 was the last in captivity. Ivan was wasting away, aging, losing his last strength. He was 24 years old but looked 40. Gray hair, his teeth were falling out from scurvy. His back was hunched. He hardly believed he would live to see liberation. January 45. The Red Army began the Vistula-Oder offensive. The Germans retreated in panic, abandoning the camps. The guard from the camp near Krakow fled in mid-January. The prisoners were left alone, without food, without water, without understanding what to do. 2 days later, Soviet tank crews entered the camp. Ivan stood by the barrack, watching the T-34s with red stars, unable to believe his eyes. Free. Liberated. The war for him was over. But in reality, a new chapter was just beginning. By evening, all the liberated were lined up, and it was announced, nobody goes anywhere. Everyone will be escorted to the collection point for registration and sending home. It sounded encouraging. Ivan rejoiced. So, home, to Mom, to Ekaterina. Soon, it will all be over. The column was marched on foot to the neighboring town, where the Red Army collection and transit point was located. They walked for 2 days. On the way, they met advancing Soviet units, tanks, artillery, infantry. The soldiers waved and shouted, "Greetings!" The former prisoners responded, but in the eyes of many, suspicion had already appeared. Something was wrong with these convoys, with these officers with cold faces. The collection point turned out to be a field fenced with barbed wire, with tents and barracks. Guards stood at the gate, Soviet soldiers with submachine guns. Ivan became wary. Why guards? Why wire? He had been liberated. He was one of their own, a Soviet soldier. But asking questions was not allowed. The column was herded inside, distributed among the barracks, ordered to wait. The interrogations began. Smersh, military counterintelligence, officers called them in one by one, asked questions. Ivan got to his interrogation on the 3rd day. He was brought into a barrack where a major of about 40 sat at a table, with a cold gaze and a file in front of him. A junior officer sat nearby, writing something down. The interrogation began with formal questions. Last name, first name, patronymic, year of birth, place of recruitment, unit. Ivan answered, trying to speak clearly, not to stutter. The major listened, took notes. Then the questions became tougher. When were you captured? Ivan explained. May 42, near Kharkov. Encirclement, breakout attempt, wounded, lost consciousness, captivity. The major looked skeptical. But why were you captured? Why didn't you shoot yourself? Why didn't you blow yourself up with a grenade? Do you know order number 270? Those captured are traitors. Ivan froze. He knew the order. It had been read to them in the unit, in the summer of 41. Prisoners' families are deprived of state allowances. The prisoners themselves are considered traitors to the homeland. But he had not surrendered voluntarily. The Germans had taken him while he was concussed. He had not collaborated with the enemy. He had survived. He had returned. He tried to explain, but the major cut him off. "Where are the documents?" Ivan said he lost them crossing the river. They got wet, turned to mush. The major sneered. "Convenient. Without documents, you're nobody. Maybe you're a German spy, maybe a Vlasovite, maybe a Polizei. Prove that you are Suhorukov, Ivan Petrovici from the village of Kreushina." Ivan was at a loss. How could he prove it? He had no documents, he had no witnesses. His comrades from the regiment had either died or were scattered across camps, across fronts. The company commander was killed, the regiment commander, who knows where. He hadn't had contact with home for 3 years. He hadn't written letters, hadn't received anything. He couldn't find the words. A lump formed in his throat. The major continued. "What did you do in captivity?" Ivan recounted. He worked clearing rubble, logging, construction. Hunger, cold, diseases. The major nodded. "But you didn't submit to German agitation? You didn't join the ROA? You didn't go to the Vlasovites?" Ivan denied. "No, never. I refused all proposals." The interrogation lasted 2 hours. The major noted the testimonies, asked the same questions in a circle, caught him in contradictions. Ivan grew tired, felt dizzy, his vision blurred. Finally, the major let him go, told him to wait for the decision. Ivan returned to the barrack. Others like him sat there, former prisoners, exhausted, frightened. They whispered among themselves. Someone had already been sent home. Someone had been arrested. Someone sent to labor battalions. Frightening rumors circulated that most former prisoners would be sent to camps, that all were considered traitors, that no one would be let go just like that. A week later, Ivan was called again. The major announced the decision: to be sent to filtration and verification camp number 283 near Voronezh for further verification. The term was not specified until clarification of circumstances. Status: not a prisoner, but not free either. Military worker. Ivan didn't understand why a camp, why verification. He had told everything, he had nothing to hide. The major waved his hand. Orders are to be followed. Ivan tried to object, to ask to be sent home, to his mother. She is waiting for him, thinks he's dead. The major looked at him coldly. Mother will wait, and you will work, prove your loyalty. The discussion is over. Filtration and verification camp number 283 was located 30 kilometers from Voronezh, on the site of a former coal mine. Barracks, watchtowers, barbed wire, searchlights, a camp like any other camp. Only instead of prisoners, there were former frontline soldiers, former prisoners, ordinary Soviet people, caught in the grinder of war. The regime was strict. Wake up at 5 in the morning, line up, roll call, breakfast, thin gruel and 100 grams of bread, then work, 12 hours in the mine. They descended into the shafts, picked coal, pushed carts, breathed dust. Hard labor, but for failing to meet the quota, the cooler or a cut in rations. In the evening, they returned to the barrack, collapsed onto their beds without undressing. The interrogations continued. Once a month, Ivan was called to the operative department, asked the same questions: how he was captured, what he did, if he collaborated with the Germans. Ivan repeated the same thing, but the investigator didn't believe him. Demanded proof, witnesses, documents. Where could he get witnesses if everyone had died or was scattered across the country? The spring of 45 passed in this camp. May, victory, the end of the war. Ivan heard about Germany's surrender from a radio broadcast they turned on in the mess hall. Everyone in the barracks shouted, hugged, cried. The war was over, meaning they would be released soon. Things would be clarified. They would understand they were not guilty, but they were not released. The work continued. The verification continued. The summer of 45, Ivan worked, waited, grew weaker. Meager food, hard work, undermined health. From his brigade, 3 died in half a year. 1 from pneumonia, 2 in work accidents in the mine. They were buried outside the zone, without honors, without crosses. The autumn of 45. Ivan met a fellow villager in the camp, Nikolai Semyonov, from a neighboring village. He too had been through captivity. He too had ended up in filtration. They met, embraced, cried. Nikolai told him news from home. The village had been under occupation for 8 months. The Germans had stayed there, burned, looted. Many had died of hunger. Ivan's mother was alive, but very ill, sick. Ekaterina was also alive, working on the kolkhoz. Ivan asked about the death notice. Nikolai nodded. It came in 42. Your mother thinks you're dead. Ekaterina too. They cried, they waited. Then they resigned themselves. Ivan was silent. So, at home, he was considered dead. For 3.5 years. What would happen when he returned? Would they recognize him? Would they believe him? The winter of 45 to 46, the hardest in the camp. Frosts, almost no heating, the barracks froze. People got sick, died. Ivan fell ill with pneumonia, lay in the infirmary for a month, survived by a miracle. The young, strong body did not give up. January 46. Nikolai Semyonov received news. His file was closed. A witness from his unit was found, confirmed the circumstances of his capture. Nikolai was found innocent, released home. Leaving, he hugged Ivan, promised to tell his mother he was alive, that he would return soon. Ivan asked him to find out about Ekaterina, to tell her he loves her, that he's waiting for her. February 46. Ivan was called to the operative department again. The investigator told him, "A witness has been found. Petru Grishin from your village. He fought with you near Kharkov, remembers that battle, confirms your testimonies. The file has been reviewed. You are recognized as not posing a danger to the state. You will be released with a certificate of passing verification." Ivan couldn't believe it. Freedom. Home. To Mom. Tears streamed down his face, his hands trembled. The investigator handed him the certificate. A standard form certificate, attesting that Private Suhorukov, Ivan Petrovich, had passed verification in the FVC, Filtration and Verification Camp, number 283. Recognized as loyal. He is directed to his place of residence. Stamp, seal, signature. But the investigator added, "Remember, you are a former prisoner. It's a stigma for life. You are not allowed to live in large cities, not allowed to hold positions of responsibility. You will be checked, you will be watched. One wrong step, and you're back. Understood?" Ivan nodded. March 46. Ivan received his release certificate. Civilian clothes, a patched jacket, trousers, wooden-soled boots, a cap. They gave him dry rations for the road, bread, canned goods, sugar. They let him out the gate. Freedom. Ivan stood on the road, looked at the spring sky, the fields, the forest in the distance. In the Kai, 2 years in the filtration camp, 5 years since leaving for the front. He was 26 years old but looked 45. Gray hair, wrinkles, hunched back, sick lungs. The war had eaten his youth. It was 150 kilometers to the village of Kryushina. Ivan set off on foot, on the spring road, through fields and forests. Passing cars rarely picked him up. Drivers were afraid of vagrants. He walked for a week, slept in haystacks, in abandoned sheds, ate his dry rations, drank from streams. He thought about his mother, about Ekaterina, about what he would tell them, how they would greet him. August 30th, 1942, the day Maria Petrovna Suhorukova and Ekaterina Zotova received the death notice for Ivan. Life broke into before and after. Maria Petrovna aged in a single day. Her face grew gaunt, her eyes dimmed, her hands fell limp. Her son perished, her husband was nowhere to be found, she was left alone. Why go on living? But she had to live. The kolkhoz demanded work, no one had cancelled the plan. Maria Petrovna continued to go to the farm, to milk the cows, to clean the manure, to carry water. She worked like an automaton, without thinking, without feeling. In the evening, she came to the empty hut, sat before her son's photograph by the iconostasis, lit the icon lamp, prayed, asked God to receive Ivan's soul, to forgive his sins, to give him rest. Ekaterina Zotova withdrew into herself. She wore a black kerchief like a widow, though she had not been married. In the village, this was the custom. The fiancée of a deceased groom was considered almost a wife. She wore mourning. She worked on the farm from morning until evening, so she would have no time to think. But at night she cried into her pillow, imagining how it could have been. A wedding, a home, children, a life together. Ekaterina Zotova's parents pitied their daughter but said, "You are young, beautiful, another will be found. You can't cry your whole life for a dead man." But Ekaterina didn't want to hear it. She had loved Ivan, believed he had been the best, that there would never be another like him. In the autumn of 42, the occupation came to the village. German units occupied Kryushina at the beginning of October. Tanks, motorcycles, trucks, soldiers in helmets with submachine guns. They forced all the inhabitants into the street and announced, "The village is under German authority. Everyone is obliged to obey. Sabotage is punishable by shooting." 8 months of occupation became a terrible time. The Germans requisitioned cattle, grain, and poultry, taking everything, leaving the minimum. The people starved, eating orach, tree bark, and frozen potatoes. Maria Petrovna gave up her last cow, her last hen. She was left with an empty garden and a handful of flour. Ekaterina starved too. She swelled from hunger and could barely walk. In the spring of 43, the Germans began sending the youth to Germany for labor. They compiled lists, began to gather girls and boys. Ekaterina ended up on the list, but at the last moment, they struck her off. She was needed on the farm, to milk the cows for the Germans' needs. She was lucky. Those who were taken would return only after the war, and not even all of them. July 43. The Red Army liberated Kryushina. The Germans left. At night, without a fight, they simply packed up their camp and headed west. In the morning, Soviet tanks entered the village. The inhabitants came out into the street, crying with joy, greeting the soldiers with bread and milk. Liberation. But the joy was short-lived. The checks began immediately. The NKVD was looking for traitors, policemen, those who had collaborated with the Germans. They arrested the mayor, Shilov, and a few other men who had worked for the Germans. They interrogated everyone who had remained under occupation. Maria Petrovna and Ekaterina also gave testimonies, recounted how they survived, what they did. They were recognized as loyal. They were not touched. Autumn 43. The village was rebuilding. The kolkhoz resumed its activity. They brought back the cattle, sowed the winter wheat. Life went on, but the village had emptied. Almost all the men had died. Only the elderly, the disabled, and children remained. The women carried the entire household on their shoulders. Maria Petrovna continued to wait for news of her son. Somewhere deep in her soul, she did not believe the death notice. Missing in action meant he could be alive. Maybe in captivity, maybe in a hospital. Maybe he had simply gotten lost. Every day she went to the post office, asking if there was a letter. The postman shook his head. Ekaterina waited too, but with each month, hope weakened. A year and a half since the death notice, no news. If he were alive, he would have written. He would have let her know. It meant he was dead. She had to resign herself to live on. But how to live without him? Spring, 44. The frontline soldiers, frontoviki, began to return to the village, demobilized due to wounds, war invalids, without hands, without legs, shell-shocked, blind. The village filled with mutilated men. Among them was Nikolai Semyonov, Ivan's neighbor, the same age, who had also left for the front in 41. He returned without his right hand. It had been torn off by shrapnel near Berlin. He was demobilized and sent home. Nikolai was a good lad. Before the war, he had worked on the kolkhoz as a tractor driver, just like Ivan. He knew Ekaterina from childhood, was friends with Ivan. Returning home, he learned of his friend's death notice. He went to Maria Petrovna to offer condolences. The old woman cried, told him how she was waiting for her son, how she didn't believe in his death. Nikolai was silent, hugged her, consoled her. Then Nikolai went to Ekaterina. They sat on the porch, talked about Ivan, about the war, about the future. Nikolai said, "I remember Ivan, he was the best friend. May his memory be eternal." Ekaterina nodded, crying. Nikolai didn't propose anything to her. He was simply there, supporting her. The summer of 44 passed in work. Nikolai was appointed brigadier on the kolkhoz. Despite the absence of his hand, he was skilled, resourceful, knew how to organize people. Ekaterina worked as a milkmaid, met Nikolai at work, they talked. Gradually they grew closer. Autumn 44. Nikolai began to court Ekaterina, carefully, without insistence. He brought her milk from his cow, helped her with household chores, walked her home from the farm. Ekaterina accepted the help, thanked him, but kept her distance. The memory of Ivan was still fresh. Winter 44, 45. The pressure on Ekaterina intensified. Her parents told her, "You are young, beautiful, you must marry, have children. Nikolai is a good man, a frontline veteran, a war invalid. With him, you will be as safe as behind a stone wall. Why wait for a dead man? 2.5 years have already passed since the death letter. Ivan isn't coming back." The kolkhoz chairman Kuznetsov also told her, "Ekaterina, marry Nikolai. He's a brigadier, a man with prospects. You'll be well off. The kolkhoz needs strong families, needs children. We must rebuild the village. Don't remain an old maid." Even Maria Petrovna, Ivan's mother, told Ekaterina, "My girl, if you have the chance to arrange your life, arrange it. Ivan would have wanted you to be happy. I bless you." These words broke Ekaterina's last resistance. Spring 45. May. Victory. The village celebrated, wept, rejoiced, remembered the fallen. Nikolai asked for Ekaterina's hand officially. He went to her parents, asked for her hand. The Zotovs agreed. They were happy. Although Ekaterina thought long, cried at night, she accepted not out of love, but out of hopelessness, out of pressure, out of the understanding that she might not have another chance. June 45. A modest wedding. They registered at the village Soviet, celebrated in a small circle. Parents, a few neighbors, Maria Petrovna. No songs, no dances, no party. The war had just ended. The village was in mourning for the dead. It was no time for merriment. Ekaterina sat in a white kerchief, pale, her eyes downcast. Nikolai was beside her, serious, understanding. He knew Ekaterina wasn't marrying him for love, but he hoped that, in time, everything would settle. Summer 45. Ekaterina and Nikolai settled in the Semyonov family home. They lived quietly, worked, managed the household. Nikolai was a good husband. He didn't drink, didn't beat her. Helped around the house as he could, with one hand. Ekaterina tried to be a good wife, but her heart wouldn't open. At night she thought of Ivan, cried into her pillow when Nikolai fell asleep. Autumn 45. Ekaterina realized she was pregnant. She told Nikolai. He was overjoyed, hugged her, kissed her on the forehead. The parents on both sides were happy too. A child, a new life, the continuation of the family line. Ekaterina was silent, stroked her belly, thought about what this child would be like, if she would love him, if she would manage to forget Ivan. Winter 45. 46. Her belly grew. Her health was good. Ekaterina continued to work on the farm until the last moment, then went on maternity leave, stayed at home, knitted booties, prepared the baby's layette. Nikolai was attentive, caring, tried to do everything to make his wife comfortable. March 46. Ekaterina was in her 8th month of pregnancy. Her belly was huge. It was hard for her to walk. There was 1 month left until the birth. Life flowed on its own. Measured, predictable. Nothing foretold any shock. April 1946. Ivan Suhorukov entered the village of Kryushina early in the morning. He walked down the familiar street, looked at the huts, the fences, the gardens. Everything had changed and yet remained the same. The houses were the same, but many were sagging, with broken windows, patched roofs. The traces of war and occupation were everywhere. Ivan reached his house. The gate creaked, as it used to. The hut was standing, but it looked abandoned. The roof had collapsed on one side. The windows were boarded up, with rags instead of glass. The garden was overgrown with weeds. His heart tightened. Had his mother died? He knocked on the door. Silence. He knocked again, harder. A rustle was heard inside, then footsteps. The door opened a crack. In the doorway stood an old woman, gray-haired, stooped, in a black kerchief. Ivan didn't immediately recognize his mother. Maria Petrovna looked at the visitor, not understanding who it was. Ragged, gray, thin, in patched clothes. Ivan took off his cap and said quietly, "Mother, it's me, Ivan." Maria Petrovna, startled, put her hand to her chest, looked in disbelief. "Ivan, my son, but you died. The death notice came 3.5 years ago." Ivan nodded. "I'm alive, Mother. I was in captivity, then in a camp. Now I've returned." Maria Petrovna swayed, grabbed the doorframe. Ivan caught her, embraced her. His mother began to cry, caressed his face, couldn't believe it was real. "My son is alive! My son is alive, returned from the dead. Lord, I thank you, you heard my prayers." The neighbor Antonina, at the well, saw the scene and began to shout. She dropped her bucket, ran down the street, yelling, "Suhorukov has returned! He's alive! Everyone look!" People came out of their houses, gathered at Maria Petrovna's gate, surrounded Ivan, stared, talked among themselves, couldn't believe it. Some rejoiced, others crossed themselves, others were silent, suspicious. They took Ivan into the house. Maria Petrovna sat him at the table, ran to the stove, began to heat up food, bustled about, crying with happiness. The neighbor women crowded into the hut asking questions. "Where were you? How did you survive? Why didn't you write?" Ivan answered monosyllabically, tired. He didn't feel like talking. The words wouldn't come. He just sat, looking at the familiar walls, the icon with his young photograph, the icon lamp. Then he asked about Ekaterina. Silence fell. The women exchanged glances. Maria Petrovna stopped by the stove, hung her head. Neighbor Antonina said quietly, "Ekaterina is married, Ivan, to Nikolai Semyonov. For a year now. We thought you wouldn't return. She's expecting a child. She'll give birth soon." Ivan sat motionless. The words reached him slowly, as if through cotton wool. Married, expecting a child by another man. Everything was over. He had gone through captivity, through the camp, survived, returned, and she was gone. She belonged to another. She had built a new life without him. He rose from the table and said, "I'm going for a walk." His mother tried to stop him, but he went out, started through the village, not knowing where. His feet carried him on their own to Ekaterina's house, or rather, it was no longer Ekaterina's, but Ekaterina Semyonova's. He stood by the gate, looking at the hut. Smoke came from the chimney. Chickens clucked in the yard. In the garden, the first seedlings were visible. An ordinary peasant life. He was not there and would not be. The gate creaked. Ekaterina came out of the house, with a bucket of milk, wearing a kerchief, in an apron, a huge belly, her hands holding the bucket. She saw Ivan and froze. She almost dropped the bucket. Her face turned white. Her lips began to tremble. They stood silently, looking at each other. 5 years of separation, a whole life between them. Ekaterina spoke first. "Ivan, is it you? You're alive?" Her voice trembled. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Ivan nodded. "I'm back." Ekaterina set the bucket on the ground, approached the gate, reached out her hand, touched his face, as if checking if he was real. Ivan stood motionless, looking at her belly, the strange child inside. Ekaterina burst into tears. "Ivan, forgive me. I thought you were dead. The death notice came. I waited 2.5 years. No letters came, no news. Everyone told me, get married, live your life. I didn't want to, but—" Ivan interrupted her. "I understand, it's not your fault. The war destroyed us all." Ekaterina shook her head. "No, it's my fault. I didn't wait for you. I betrayed your memory. If I had known you were alive—" Ivan said quietly, "But you didn't know, and I didn't know you thought I was dead. No one is to blame." Nikolai Semyonov came out of the house, saw the scene at the gate, approached. With one hand in a military tunic, gymnastiorka, with medals, his face harsh, he stopped next to Ekaterina, put his left hand on her shoulder, looked at Ivan. "Heard you returned. We thought you were dead." Ivan nodded. You thought right. But here I am, returned. Nikolai spoke calmly, without malice. Ekaterina is my wife now. We're expecting a child. I take care of her. She's in good hands with me. I don't mistreat her. Ivan replied. I see. Take care of her, Nikolai. She's good. She deserves happiness. Nikolai nodded. I know. But you? Will you manage? Ivan smirked. Somehow. I lived 5 years in hell. I'll survive here too. He turned and left. Ekaterina called after him. Ivan! He turned back. She stood, clutching her belly with her hands, her face full of tears, and said quietly, Forgive me. Ivan shook his head. There's nothing to forgive. Live happily. He left, without looking back again. Ekaterina remained at the gate until he disappeared around the bend. Nikolai embraced her and led her into the house. She cried all night. Ivan returned to his mother, sat at the table, silent. Maria Petrovna tried to feed him, but he didn't eat. He stared at a fixed point, thought about Ekaterina, about the child, about the fact that he had lost everything. His mother sat beside him, took his hand. Son, you're alive. That's the most important thing. The rest will sort itself out somehow. But it didn't sort itself out. From the first days after his return, Ivan faced distrust and suspicion. The village did not greet him as a hero returned from the front, but as a man with a stigma, a traitor. The day after his return, the district policeman, Sheffield de Post, Petru Kudryshov, came to him. He asked for his documents. Ivan showed him the certificate from the filtration camp. Kudryshov read it and grimaced. Former prisoner. Means you passed verification. But that means nothing. You'll be under surveillance. Once a month, report to the village Soviet to sign. If you violate, I'll arrest you. Ivan asked. Surveillance for what? I'm not convicted. I have a certificate. Kudryshov sneered. The certificate says they didn't convict you, but it doesn't say you're not guilty. All former prisoners are suspects. You could have collaborated with the Germans in captivity, could have agitated, could have done anything. That's why you'll be under control. Rumors began to circulate through the village. The old women whispered, Suhorukov returned from captivity. Means he's a traitor. The real heroes all died, and this one survived. Probably befriended the Germans. The men in the kolkhoz leadership said the same thing. How did he survive when so many perished? Means he surrendered voluntarily, worked for the fascists. Ivan tried to ignore it, but it was impossible. When he walked down the street, people turned their heads, crossed to the other side. When he entered the store, the shopkeeper served him last, with disgust. When he went to the kolkhoz leadership to get a job, Chairman Kuznetsov told him directly, You're a former prisoner. You have a certificate from the camp. We don't take the likes of you for responsible work. You can go as an unskilled laborer to the dirtiest work. Ivan agreed. He had no choice. They put him to clean the stable, to remove the manure, to dig ditches. The work was hard, dirty, but at least it paid something. Workdays, for which he then received a meager ration. Ivan worked in silence, didn't complain. He had gotten used to worse in captivity and in the camp. This was bearable. But the worst was the attitude of the frontline veterans. Those who had fought to the end, who had reached Berlin, who had returned with orders and medals, looked at Ivan with contempt. In their eyes he was a traitor, a coward, unworthy of being called a soldier. When they met on the street, they passed him without greeting. When they gathered for holidays, they didn't invite him. Shame and insult burned inside him. But what could he do? It was impossible to prove anything. The stigma of a former prisoner couldn't be washed away. He saw Ekaterina from a distance. She walked through the village, pregnant with Nikolai beside her. Ivan tried not to cross their path, took side streets, hid around corners. Only once did they meet at the well. Ekaterina was drawing water. Ivan also approached with his bucket. They stood silently, not knowing what to say to each other. June 46. Ekaterina gave birth to a son. They named him Vladimir. Ivan found out from his mother. Maria Petrovna went to visit Ekaterina, brought gifts for the child, helped her with what she could. She considered Ekaterina almost a daughter-in-law. She couldn't just turn her back. Ivan didn't object, saying, Go, mother, help her. She's not to blame. Summer 46. Ivan worked, kept silent, drank samagon, moonshine, in the evenings. He had no money for samagon. He received it in exchange for work. He dug a neighbor's garden, and the neighbor gave him a bottle. Ivan drank alone in the shed, so his mother wouldn't see. He got drunk until he lost consciousness, forgot everything, fell into the hay, slept until morning. He woke up with a headache, went to work, endured the mockery, the sidelong glances, the contempt. Maria Petrovna cried, seeing her son destroying himself, tried to talk to him, but he waved his hand. Everything's normal, mother. Don't worry. But nothing was normal. Ivan lived as if in a fog, without purpose, without hope. He simply existed. Day after day. At night he was tormented by nightmares. He dreamed of the German camps, the interrogations, the executions, the hunger. He dreamed of Ekaterina, young, beautiful, in a white kerchief, like in 41. He woke up in a cold sweat, realized it was just a dream, that reality was much worse. In the autumn of 46, he was summoned to the militia. The district policeman Kudryashov told him, "We have a complaint against you, Suhorukov. They say you're engaging in anti-Soviet talk, cursing the Soviet authorities." Ivan was perplexed. "Who is complaining? What is it about?" Kudryashov. "It's not your business who. Answer the question. Did you curse or not?" Ivan remembered. A week ago, in the bread line, he had been talking to a neighbor, complaining about life, about how war veterans were humiliated, how former prisoners were treated like lepers. He had said something like, "What kind of justice is this? I fought for the homeland, ended up in captivity not of my own will, and now I'm treated like an enemy." Someone probably overheard and reported him. Kudryashov noted the statements, looked at him suspiciously. "So you're dissatisfied with Soviet power? You consider yourself treated unfairly?" Ivan tried to explain, but the words came out clumsy, tangled. Kudryashov nodded. "Watch yourself, Suhorukov. One more complaint and you go to the district. There they'll talk to you seriously. Understood?" Ivan understood. To be silent, not to stand out, not to complain, to endure. Otherwise, a new arrest, a new camp. He had learned that in the filtration camp. To be silent, not to contradict, to do as ordered. The winter of 46, 47 was hard. Cold, hunger, poverty. Maria Petrovna was ill, coughing, growing weaker. Ivan took care of her, brought her water, made the fire in the stove, boiled porridge from the last reserves. His mother was fading before his eyes, but she held on, didn't complain, said, "The main thing is that you don't perish, son. I'll manage somehow." January 47. The district policeman came to Ivan again and said, "Pack your things. You're summoned to the district, to the NKVD." Ivan froze. "Why?" Kudryashov shrugged. "I don't know. The order came. You leave tomorrow morning." Maria Petrovna began to cry. "Son, what's happening? You just returned, and they're taking you again." Ivan calmed her. "It's nothing, mother. Just a check. I'll be back." But he himself understood that it was bad. Very bad. The next morning, Ivan dressed in the cleanest clothes he had. He said goodbye to his mother. She stood on the porch, making the sign of the cross after him, crying. District policeman Kudryashov was waiting for him at the gate with a cart. They left for the district, to the town of Rososh, to the NKVD building. They arrived around noon. Ivan was led into a building with peeling plaster, down a corridor with portraits of the leaders on the walls. In an office on the second floor, a major of about 50 sat at a desk, with a cold face and a file in front of him. He introduced himself, Major Kravtsov, NKVD operative, and ordered him to sit. The interrogation began immediately. Kravtsov opened the file, took out typed sheets. "Suhorukov Ivan Petrovich, correct?" "Correct." "Former prisoner of war, passed verification in PFL, filtration and verification camp, number 283, released in March 46, correct?" Ivan didn't understand where this was going. Kravtsov continued, "We have information that you, during your time in German captivity, collaborated with the enemy, worked as a starosta in the camp, handed over Soviet officers to the Germans, assisted in interrogations. We have witnesses. What do you say to that?" Ivan froze. It was a total, absolute lie. He had never been a starosta, hadn't handed anyone over, hadn't collaborated with the Germans. He tried to explain, but Kravtsov interrupted him. "We have signed testimonies. Here, read." He handed him a sheet. "You can go as an unskilled laborer, to the dirtiest work." Ivan agreed. He had no choice. They put him to clean the stable, to remove the manure, to dig ditches. The work was hard, dirty, but at least it paid something. Workdays, for which he then received a meager ration. Ivan worked in silence, didn't complain. He had gotten used to worse in captivity and in the camp. This was bearable. But the worst was the attitude of the frontline veterans. Those who had fought to the end, who had reached Berlin, who had returned with orders and medals, looked at Ivan with contempt. In their eyes he was a traitor, a coward, unworthy of being called a soldier. When they met on the street, they passed him without greeting. When they gathered for holidays, they didn't invite him. Shame and insult burned inside him. But what could he do? It was impossible to prove anything. The stigma of a former prisoner couldn't be washed away. He saw Ekaterina from a distance. She walked through the village, pregnant, with Nikolai beside her. Ivan tried not to cross their path, took side streets, hid around corners. Only once did they meet at the well. Ekaterina was drawing water. Ivan also approached with his bucket. They stood silently, not knowing what to say to each other. June 46. Ekaterina gave birth to a son. They named him Vladimir. Ivan found out from his mother. Maria Petrovna went to visit Ekaterina, brought gifts for the child, helped her with what she could. She considered Ekaterina almost a daughter-in-law. She couldn't just turn her back. Ivan didn't object, saying, "Go, mother, help her, she's not to blame." Summer 46. Ivan worked, kept silent, drank samagon, moonshine, in the evenings. He had no money for samagon. He received it in exchange for work. He dug a neighbor's garden, and the neighbor gave him a bottle. Ivan drank alone in the shed, so his mother wouldn't see. He got drunk until he lost consciousness, forgot everything, fell into the hay, slept until morning. He woke up with a headache, went to work, endured the mockery, the sidelong glances, the contempt. Maria Petrovna cried, seeing her son destroying himself, tried to talk to him, but he waved his hand. "Everything's normal, mother, don't worry." But nothing was normal. Ivan lived as if in a fog, without purpose, without hope. He simply existed, day after day. At night, he was tormented by nightmares. He dreamed of the German camps, the interrogations, the executions, the hunger. He dreamed of Ekaterina, young, beautiful, in a white kerchief like in 41. He woke up in a cold sweat, realized it was just a dream. That reality was much worse. In the autumn of 46, he was summoned to the militia. The district policeman Kudryashov told him, "We have a complaint against you, Suhorukov. They say you're engaging in anti-Soviet talk, cursing the Soviet authorities." Ivan was perplexed. "Who is complaining? What is it about?" Kudryashov. "It's not your business who. Answer the question. Did you curse or not?" Ivan remembered. A week ago, in the bread line, he had been talking to a neighbor, complaining about life, about how war veterans were humiliated, how former prisoners were treated like lepers. He had said something like, "What kind of justice is this? I fought for the homeland, ended up in captivity not of my own will, and now I'm treated like an enemy." Someone probably overheard and reported him. Kudryashov noted the statements, looked at him suspiciously. "So you're dissatisfied with Soviet power? You consider yourself treated unfairly?" Ivan tried to explain, but the words came out clumsy, tangled. Kudryashov nodded. "Watch yourself, Suhorukov. One more complaint and you go to the district. There they'll talk to you seriously. Understood?" Ivan understood. To be silent, not to stand out, not to complain, to endure. Otherwise, a new arrest, a new camp. He had learned that in the filtration camp. To be silent, not to contradict, to do as ordered. The winter of 46-47 was hard. Cold, hunger, poverty. Maria Petrovna was ill, coughing, growing weaker. Ivan took care of her, brought her water, made the fire in the stove, boiled porridge from the last reserves. His mother was fading before his eyes, but she held on, didn't complain, said, "The main thing is that you don't perish, son. I'll manage somehow." January 47. The district policeman came to Ivan again and said, "Pack your things. You're summoned to the district, to the NKVD." Ivan froze. "Why?" Kudryashov shrugged. "I don't know. The order came. You leave tomorrow morning." Maria Petrovna began to cry. "Son, what's happening? You just returned, and they're taking you again." Ivan calmed her. "It's nothing, Mother. Just a check. I'll be back." But he himself understood that it was bad. Very bad. The next morning, Ivan dressed in the cleanest clothes he had. He said goodbye to his mother. She stood on the porch, making the sign of the cross after him, crying. District Policeman Kudryashov was waiting for him at the gate with a cart. They left for the district, to the town of Rososh, to the NKVD building. They arrived around noon. Ivan was led into a building with peeling plaster, down a corridor with portraits of the leaders on the walls. In an office on the second floor, a major of about 50 sat at a desk, with a cold face and a file in front of him. He introduced himself, Major Kravtsov, NKVD operative, and ordered him to sit. The interrogation began immediately. Kravtsov opened the file, took out typed sheets. Suhorukov Ivan Petrovich, correct? Correct. Former prisoner of war, past verification in PFL, filtration and verification camp, number 283, released in March 46, correct? Ivan didn't understand where this was going. Kravtsov continued. "We have information that you, during your time in German captivity, collaborated with the enemy, worked as a starosta in the camp, handed over Soviet officers to the Germans, assisted in interrogations. We have witnesses. What do you say to that?" Ivan froze. It was a total, absolute lie. He had never been a starosta, hadn't handed anyone over, hadn't collaborated with the Germans. He tried to explain, but Kravtsov interrupted him. "We have signed testimonies. Here, read." He handed him a sheet. Ivan took it with trembling hands. He read the testimony of a certain Petrov Semyon Ivanovich, a former prisoner, who supposedly had been in the same camp with Ivan and had seen him collaborating with the Germans. Detailed descriptions, dates, places, facts. Everything seemed convincing, but it was all a lie. Ivan didn't know any Petrov, had never seen him. He tried to explain, but Kravtsov wasn't listening. He said the case was clear, the evidence existed, there would be a trial, he would receive a fitting sentence. Article 58, Part 1. B. Treason against the homeland. 10 years of camps, or maybe even execution. Ivan understood this was the end. The case was fabricated. He couldn't prove anything. He had no defense witnesses, no documents. The system was grinding him down, as it had ground down thousands of others like him. Former prisoners, a convenient target. Anything could be pinned on them. No one checked. The interrogations lasted 3 days. Every day, the same story. Accusations, the false witnesses' statements, demands to confess. Ivan denied, but it was useless. On the 4th day, he was transferred to the pre-trial detention cell. Concrete walls, bunks, a slop bucket in the corner, a small window under the ceiling. In the cell with him were 5 others, thieves, deserters, common criminals. They stayed for a month. Ivan was called several times for interrogations, demanded to sign the confession. They promised him, "Sign, we'll give you 5 years. Don't sign, we'll shoot you." Ivan didn't sign. Not out of heroism, he just didn't want to admit what he hadn't done. The last remnant of dignity. In March 47, the trial took place. The NKVD Troika. 3 officers at the table, a prosecutor, a secretary. Ivan stood before them, thin, in prisoner's clothes, without a defender. They read him the charge. Treason against the homeland, collaboration with the enemy during captivity, handing over Soviet citizens to German authorities. They asked if he pleaded guilty. Ivan replied, "No, I do not plead guilty. It's all a lie." The Troika retired to deliberate, returned after 10 minutes. The verdict, guilty, according to Article 58, Part 1, B. 10 years of corrective labor camps with confiscation of property and deprivation of rights. The sentence is final and cannot be appealed. Ivan was led away. He didn't cry, didn't shout. He just walked down the corridor, unable to feel his legs. 10 years. He had already spent 3 years in German captivity, 2 years in the filtration camp, now another 10. He was 27 years old. He would get out at 37 if he survived. He thought of his mother. She wouldn't bear this news. She would die of grief. He thought of Ekaterina. She wouldn't even find out what happened to him. She would live her life, raise her child, forget him. He thought of the village, the fields, the river where he swam as a child. All of that was left in the past. Forever. April 1947. The transport to Siberia. Freight cars packed with prisoners. Ivan sat in a corner on the bunk. Next to him, thieves, murderers, politicals. They traveled for 3 weeks, across the Urals, through the endless expanses of the taiga to the Krasnoyarsk region. They stopped at stations, unloaded the dead, loaded new ones. Angarsky Camp, number 228. Gulag, taiga zone, 300 kilometers from the nearest town. Barracks, watchtowers, barbed wire, searchlights. 1,003 prisoners, Ziki. Different articles, different terms. Ivan ended up in the logging brigade, to fell the forest, cut, load onto carts. The regime was harsh. Wake up at 5 in the morning, line up, roll call. Breakfast, a thin gruel, balanda, and 300 grams of bread. Then to work, walking 10 kilometers into the taiga. Work from 7 in the morning until 7 in the evening. 12 hours. The quota. 4 cubic meters of wood per person per day. If you didn't meet the quota, your ration was cut. In the evening, back to the zone, dinner, lights out. Ivan worked to exhaustion. The saw was dull, the axe rusty, his hands full of calluses and wounds, felling trees, trimming branches, carrying logs. His back ached, his lungs wheezed from the cold. Winter in the taiga was terrible, -40. The wind pierced you to the bone, the clothes were thin, many didn't last, died right in the forest, fell and didn't get up. In the first year of the camp, Ivan buried dozens of brigade comrades. In winter, they died of cold and exhaustion. In summer, of diseases and accidents. The medical station was nominal. A feldsher, a few beds, no medicine. If you got seriously ill, that was it. The end. They buried them in common graves, outside the zone, without crosses, without plaques. Ivan held on not out of willpower, but out of habit. He had already gone through German captivity, through the filtration camp. He had learned to survive, knew how to conserve energy, how not to attract the guards' attention, how to divide the ration to last the day. He was silent, worked, didn't complain. In the autumn of 1947, a letter came to the camp from the chairman of the Kryushina village Soviet. Short, dry, in bureaucratic language. Ivan's mother, Maria Petrovna Suhorukova, died on August 15, 1947, was buried in the village cemetery. Ivan received the letter, read it, folded it, hid it in his breast pocket, went to the barracks, lay down on the bunk facing the wall. He didn't cry. He had no more tears. He just lay, looking at the log wall, thinking. Mother is dead. The last person who loved him, waited for him, believed in him. Now he has no one. He is completely alone. From that day, something broke inside Ivan. He continued to work, to eat, to sleep, but he lived like an automaton. He didn't think about the future, didn't make plans, didn't hope. He simply existed day by day, meeting the quota, avoiding punishments, surviving winter after winter. March 1953. The news of Stalin's death. Commotion began in the zone. The prisoners hoped for amnesty, for release. But the amnesty only affected common criminals and those convicted of minor offenses. The politicals were not touched. Ivan remained. The years 1954, 55 dragged on slowly. Ivan no longer believed he would ever get out. The term seemed an eternity. He counted the days, the months, the years. 2 years remained until the end of his term. February 1956, the 20th Party Congress. Khrushchev's report on Stalin's cult of personality. The prisoners heard snippets of information from the new transports. It was said there would be a review of cases, rehabilitation of the unjustly convicted. Hope began to appear. In the summer of '56, a commission came to the camp to review the cases of political prisoners. They called them one by one, studied the files, asked questions. Ivan came before the commission in August, told his story. The front, captivity, filtration, the arrest based on a fabricated case. The commission listened, took notes. A month later, they announced the decision. The case of Suhorukov Ivan Petrovich has been reviewed. The charges were recognized as unfounded. The sentence is annulled. The prisoner is rehabilitated and is to be released immediately, to be issued a certificate of rehabilitation and compensation for illegal detention. Ivan stood before the commission and couldn't believe it. Freedom. After 9.5 years of Gulag, he was 36 years old, but he looked 60. His health was destroyed, lungs diseased, back broken, toothless, but he was alive and free. September 1956. Ivan walked out the camp gate. In his hands, he held the rehabilitation certificate, civilian clothes, a dry ration for the road, compensation of 500 rubles. Behind him, 9.5 years of hell in the taiga. Ahead, the unknown. Ivan traveled home for 2 weeks, by trains, by hitchhiking, on foot. The money ran out quickly. He rode without a ticket, begged for a piece of bread. People looked with pity at the ragged old man, with his gray face and empty eyes. Mid-October '56. The village of Krushina greeted Ivan with autumn rain and mud. He walked down the street. No one recognized him. He had changed beyond recognition, transformed into a strange old man. He reached his house. The hut stood half demolished. The roof had caved in, windows were broken, the door torn from its hinges. The garden was overgrown with burdocks and nettles. The fence was crooked. The house was dead, abandoned. Ivan went inside. Empty, filth, trash, mold on the walls. The stove had collapsed. The floors had rotted. Nothing remained of his former life. He went out on the porch, sat on the step. The rain poured, soaking him to the skin. But Ivan didn't leave. He sat, looking at the deserted street, the crooked huts. The village had emptied. The youth had left for the cities. Only the elderly and the disabled remained. Krushina was dying. He went to the cemetery, found his mother's grave. A mound of earth, a crooked wooden cross, the faded inscription, barely legible. Maria Petrovna Suhorukova, 1893, 47. Ivan knelt, put his head on the mound. He cried for the first time in all the years of the camp. He cried for a long time, sobbing, like a child. Then he got up, wiped his face on his sleeve. He had to find out what happened to Ekaterina. He went to the old neighbor Antonina. She was still alive, very old, almost blind. She didn't recognize Ivan at first, then made an amazed sound, crossed herself. "Alive, Lord, and we thought you died in the camps." Ivan asked about Ekaterina. Antonina sighed. Ekaterina left with her family to the city, to Voronezh, about 3 years ago. Nikolai got a job at the factory. They received an apartment, took the children. They already have 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. They live well. Ekaterina still comes to the village sometimes, to her parents. Antonina didn't know the address. Ivan nodded. It meant everything was definitively over. Ekaterina was living her own life. She had a family, children, a husband. He, for her, was a ghost from the past, whom she had long since buried. There was no point in meeting. And why? What would he tell her? What would he show her? A destroyed life, a sick body, empty eyes. In the morning, he went to the village Soviet. The chairman was a young lad now. Ivan didn't know him. He explained the situation. Returned from the camps, rehabilitated. House is destroyed, needs help. The chairman shrugged. "I have nothing to help you with. No money, no materials. You can get a job as a watchman on the farm. They'll pay you a few kopecks and give you a place in the watchman's booth." Ivan agreed. He began to live in the watchman's booth on the farm. A tiny room, 3 by 3 meters, a barrel stove, borzwika, a plank bed, a table. The work was simple, to watch so nothing was stolen, to make rounds of the territory at night. They paid miserably, but at least it was something. Ivan didn't complain. He was used to worse. He lived alone, spoke to no one, just greeted when he met someone. The villagers avoided him. A former Zek, prisoner. What's there to talk about? There was almost no youth left in the village. The old people died one after another. Kryushina was turning into a ghost village. In the evenings, Ivan sat by the stove, warming himself, smoking cheap makorka, thinking about the life he had lived. At 41, he leaves for the war full of strength and hope, with a fiancée, with plans for the future. In 56, he returns, broken, sick, alone, without a past and without a future. 15 years of war, captivity, camps, youth, health, love, everything burned up in that hell. He remembered Ekaterina, how she was in 41, young, laughing, with a braid down to her waist, how they sat on the fallen birch tree at the edge of the village dreaming of a wedding of children of a home, how she saw him off to the front waving her kerchief crying, and how he met her 5 years later pregnant, married with a strange child in her womb. 2 different lives, 2 different worlds. He thought, was she to blame? No, of course not. She had waited 2.5 years, received the death notice, believed him dead, had the right to rebuild her life. She couldn't mourn a dead man her whole life. Was he to blame? Also no. He hadn't surrendered voluntarily, hadn't collaborated with the enemy, had survived as best he could. Things just happened that way. The war broke millions of destinies, his included. The system was to blame. The state, which considered its soldiers who fell captive as traitors, which instead of help organized filtration, interrogations, camps, which fabricated cases, imprisoned the innocent, destroyed people. But one couldn't speak about that aloud. He could only think, lying on the plank bed in the cold booth. The winter of 56, 57 was hard. Ivan was sick, coughing up blood, but he didn't go to the doctors. He knew treatment was useless. His lungs were destroyed by the camps. He didn't have much time left. He lay on the plank bed, wrapped in a sheepskin coat, waiting for another coughing fit to pass. In the spring of 57, Ekaterina came to the village to visit her parents. Ivan found out from the watchman at the neighboring farm. He wanted to go, to see her at least from a distance, but he didn't. Why show her his ruin? To frighten her? No. Better she remember him as young, as he was in 41. Let her live peacefully, not be tormented by guilt. But Ekaterina found him herself. She came to the booth in the evening, knocked. Ivan opened. In the doorway stood a woman of about 35. Beautiful, well-groomed, in a city coat, with a short haircut. She looked at him, and in her eyes was horror. "Ivan, is it you? What's wrong with you?" Ivan was silent. Ekaterina entered, looked around. Poverty, cold, desolation. She sat on a stool and began to cry. "Ivan, why didn't you let us know you returned? I would have helped. Nikolai and I would have found a solution." Ivan shook his head. "I don't need help. I live as I can." Ekaterina told him they had moved to the city. Nikolai has a good job, they have an apartment, they can help him. Maybe Ivan will come to them. They'll find him a job, at least as a watchman, give him a room in the dormitory. Ivan refused. "I don't want to live on charity. I don't want to be a burden. My place is here." Ekaterina cried, asked his forgiveness for not waiting, for getting married, for building a life without him. Ivan took her hand. "You are guilty of nothing. I'm glad you're happy, that you have a family, children. That's how it should be. And I've lived my life." Ekaterina left after an hour, turned back at the gate, waved. Ivan stood in the doorway of the booth, watched her leave down the dark street. They never saw each other again. Even Suhorukov lived in that booth for another 3 years. He worked as long as he had the strength. Then he became bedridden. In the winter of 1960, he was found dead on the plank bed. He had died in his sleep from cardiac arrest. He was 40 years old. They buried him in the village cemetery next to his mother. The coffin was carried by 4 old men. About 10 people saw him off. Neighbors, the village Soviet chairman, the watchman from the neighboring farm. Ekaterina was not at the funeral. She couldn't make it. she found out too late. On the cross at the grave they wrote, Suhorukov Ivan Petrovich, 1920, 1960 frontline soldier, rehabilitated in 1956. Nothing more. The village of Kryushina disappeared in the 70s. It was disbanded, merged with the neighboring kolkhoz. The people were moved. The houses were dismantled for firewood. The cemetery became overgrown with weeds. Ivan's grave was lost among hundreds of other crooked crosses and grass-covered mounds. Ekaterina lived a long life, raised 3 children, took care of her grandchildren. Nikolai died in the 80s. She remained a widow, but not alone. Family, relatives, friends. Sometimes she remembered Ivan, that young boy with whom she had once sat on the fallen birch at the edge of the village. She kept his last letter from the front, written in 42. She showed it to her grandchildren. This was my fiancé. He died at the front. The grandchildren listened, nodded, but didn't understand. For them, the war was distant history. The story of Ivan Suhorukov is one of millions of similar stories. A soldier who went through war, captivity, camps, returned home and didn't find his place there. The state considered them traitors. Society shunned them, families broke apart. They lived short, broken lives and died in anonymity. Only after half a century, when the archives were opened, when historians began to study the documents, did it become clear. These people were not traitors. They were victims of the war and victims of the system. They deserved memory, respect, justice. But justice came too late.